So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Careers in Accounting and Finance panel. My name is Allison, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's session. This afternoon, we have representatives from Eckler, Parkland Corporation, WBLI Chartered Accountants, TD Bank, and CPA Nova Scotia School of Business, who are here to inform you of one of the most exciting and fastest growing fields in the industry. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items we would like to review with you. In case of an emergency, please evacuate through the nearest fire exit. Please turn off or mute your cell phones for the remainder of the session. We kindly ask that you remain seated throughout this entire session. And please postpone all questions until the end of our panel discussion, as we will have an open Q&A. And finally, as many of you know, this is a Learning Passport eligible event. In order to keep things efficient, we ask that you complete your booklet page before retrieving a stamp at the very end of the session. So I'm going to start off with the first question for this afternoon's session. And the first question is, please introduce yourself, your position, and the company you work for. And we will start with you, Nathan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Allison. So I work for TD Bank. My role within TD is to provide support and manage the hiring functions for Atlantic Canada, and that's across most of the roles within TD Bank. So not so much your high volume positions like personal bankers, but things within commercial banking, wealth, finance, and any of our senior leadership roles within our branch network. Been with TD only for about a year, but about 10 years now in the finance industry across a couple of different FIs. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys, hearing your questions, and hopefully giving you some perspective on the banking industry in Canada.
Thank you. Rhonda?
Hi, yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronda Dwyer. I work for a company called Parkland Fuel Corporation, which is a petroleum distribution business across Canada and into central United States. My position there is a director of corporate development, so I work on acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions and divestitures. I've been with the company for about 14 years. You may recognize it locally by the brand name Blue Wave Energy, and so our primary business is the distribution of petroleum products. I earned my CMA locally here through a university in 2000, and since then I've been practicing various areas of finance and accounting.
Thank you. Joelle?
Hi, my name's Joelle, and I work with WBLI Chartered Accountants. We're the largest independent CA firm in Atlantic Canada. I've been with them for 14 years. I'm a senior manager in their assurance side, which is dealing with clients and their corporate tax returns and their financial statements. I graduated from the Mount in 1997 with a Bachelor of Business Administration Cooperative Education option, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you guys.
Andre?
Hi, my name is Andre Bellefeuille. I work with the CPA Atlantic School of Business. If you do become an accountant here in Atlantic Canada, you will be coming through our school. There's no other way to become a CPA these days. My role there is as a director of marketing and business development, so that's correct. I don't work in an accounting role per se, but I do happen to be a CMA as well. And over the next few minutes, I'll explain to you why it's a good combination.
And Mary Kate?
Hi, I'm Mary Kate Archibald. I work for Eckler Limited. We're a pension consulting firm. I'm an actuary and senior consultant and principal with the firm. So we consult to defined benefit pension plans. We also do investment in defined contribution pension plan consulting as well.
Thank you. So our second question for today is, what led you to the position you're in today? Was it your education, job experience, co-op, professional connections, etc.? And if you could touch on your education and background and training, that would be great. So let's start with Andre.
Okay, I didn't see that coming. All right, well, I would have normally said, as opposed to the rest of you, I probably have an unusual path. Like all good accountants, I started with a Bachelor of Journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa, where I grew up. And when you do take a degree like this, and I think it's true for most specialized degrees, there's a 50-50 chance at best that you'll stay in that sector. I didn't. I quickly moved off into corporate communications, which happens to pay more, but I didn't know that at the time. And got a first job at the Canadian Space Agency, if you even knew that we had one, and clearly I was not an astronaut. But I was exposed to a lot of things that in journalism school they teach you about communication, which turns out to be a major element of business, not just accounting. And then worked for another not-for-profit in Toronto for a number of years until ultimately I worked with the predecessor to our school, which was CMA Nova Scotia, or at least one of the predecessors, I should say. I've accidentally sort of ended up in business, as you might gather from my introductory comments. I had no aspirations to do that. I'm a fairly artsy guy. I enjoy dealing with people. The last thing I want to do is be in business, let alone deal with numbers. But as my career has blossomed, let's say, I realized that I had become kind of a businessman, for lack of a better term, and then as I got into my early 40s, which was just a few years ago, I realized if I want to be in business at a managerial level, which for me is the fun part of doing business, had better be able to speak business. And I could see no better way of doing that than to, as an adult learner, do my accounting designation.
And if everyone could please just bring their mic in a little bit. I guess it's a little hard to hear up top. Thank you. Okay, so the next person we'll hear from is Mary Kate.
Well, so my job is, my profession is an actuary. This is a very math-based job, and I did a math degree at Acadia. I graduated in 2001. And while doing my math degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I was good at math, and so I thought I'll study math and then see where that takes me. And it wasn't until after graduating that I started thinking about what's the next step for me after I did my undergrad. Should I look at doing further academia, look at doing a master's, or should I consider some sort of other professional job? So I actually decided against academia and thought, all right, I'll start applying for actuarial jobs. And first place I looked was Maritime Life, because they were the big actuarial employer in Halifax. And they said, well, we don't hire people unless they have an actuarial exam. And so I started looking into this, and I thought, well, what's an actuarial exam? I don't even know how this works. And so I started researching it and realized that to become an actuary, typically you would do some sort of undergraduate degree in business or math, and then you would typically get a job and or start writing some exams around the same time, and you would go through a series of about 8 exams, fairly grueling. Takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years to complete all the exams during a job setting. So anyway, I started looking around and registered for an exam, and at the same time I got a job with Eckler, which is my current employer. So that was about 13 years ago that I did that, and so that's sort of how I happened into the job, as I kind of was just researching what are my options with my math degree. And I wasn't sure when I started out if it was going to be a good fit, but it turns out it's a great fit. Consulting is really exciting. You get to do different types of work every day. It's not the same thing day in and day out, dealing with different clients. So it really worked out well for me. But it is a really difficult path to get your fellowship as an actuary. When I did it, there were 8 exams, roughly 400 study hours per exam. So if that gives you a sense of how much time it takes to prepare for each exam, most people write each exam twice. So that's a lot of study hours to become a fellow of this profession. But once you get the job, if you Google the top jobs to have, actuary is either usually number 1 or number 2.
Thank you. Joelle?
Okay. Sorry. Well, I graduated from the Mount in 1997. I did my business administration degree here with a co-op option, which I highly recommend. I did 2 co-op terms with a small firm in Sackville and realized I really, really enjoyed accounting. Some people, you really like accounting, or you really don't like accounting. So it's good to get that practical experience before I decided to, after I got my degree, to go on and pursue my CA designation. And at that time, the CA designation was a 2-year program, and I went to work for a firm downtown and got my designation and jumped to a smaller firm, and now I'm with WBLI, where I've been there for 14 years. So I say it's the great accounting staff at Mount St. Vincent that led me on my career path as a CA. So,
Thank you. Ronda?
Yes, so my career path, I guess a combination of education, luck, and a lot of hard work. So that started here at Mount St. Vincent, sitting in the chairs where you are today. I graduated a while back, maybe we'll give you the date, with my Bachelor of Business Administration degree, and I had majored in accounting and management at the time. And in going into my 3rd year, the Mount was very new with their co-op program then, and so it intrigued me to have the work experience along with going to school. So I immediately applied for that program and was accepted. And so my jobs over the 3rd and 4th year were more industry related, where I worked at not so much at a firm, but with government and small business. And so there I was really able to see accounting in real life, what it really means to do a job in accounting, which from my perspective was much different than reading it and sort of exercises in a textbook. And so it was there that I really enjoyed business and accounting, and met some really great people. So I had some really good early mentors through those co-op programs as well, where I worked at these locations. And so from there I graduated, and my first job, where the luck part comes in, was a blind ad in the newspaper. And so it was a blind ad for an inventory analyst, and so I put forward my resume, as most people do when they're ready to start looking for jobs after your kind of fourth year. And I had this call one day, and it was this gentleman on the phone, and he said, Ronda, I'm calling you from Coca-Cola, and you had applied to one of our jobs, and we would like you to come in for an interview. And so I was like, oh, really? And I couldn't really put the two and two together. And then I said, oh, were you the blind ad in the paper? And he goes, yes, in fact, we were, because they were not really wanting to draw too many resumes, that kind of wanted to weed it out that way a bit. So had the interview and was hired there. It was in Halifax, and worked there for about 7 years in various roles, starting as an inventory analyst, which you may not think might be a job that you would start on fresh out of school. But basically, it was working with Coca-Cola, reconciling their inventory, helping with the costing system that they have for production and distribution. So from there, it was sort of 7 or 8 years into that job that I kind of wanted to build on my accounting experience and education, and so enrolled in the CMA program at that time. And so through working and doing the education at the same time through the CMA path, I was able to graduate there with my CMA and still continue to grow in my career. So from Coca-Cola, I moved to this fuel distribution business through a couple steps on the way, and now my role is more in the mergers and acquisitions, and more in the finance versus accounting field. So I would say, if you're looking more for the finance side of things, that's definitely a core skill set to have in mergers and acquisitions, which is my primary role. And some of the jobs now that we have in our department are business analysts, corporate development managers, just people that work on our, analyzing and evaluating our acquisition prospects. So been there for now 14 years, and Lee's here today. So thank you.
That's great, thank you. And finally, Nathan.
Great. So from an educational background perspective, I actually went to, this may or may not go over that well in this room, but St. Mary's. Go Huskies, anyone? No? Okay. So that's where my educational background comes from, and I did a Bachelor of Commerce and Arts program combined, so human resources undergrad and a psychology undergrad at the same time. Interesting program, really enjoyed it. I won't tell you guys a whole lot necessarily about my career path, and the reason why I say that is because I don't actually work in a finance function, and I know you guys are looking for that. I'm probably going to give you guys much more perspective here this afternoon on what the banks look for when they're looking to bring people into those types of functionalities within their organizations. I'll probably talk about TD a lot because that's where I'm from, and it's the best bank, obviously. But I'll probably also tell you guys a little bit just from a general industry perspective as well, because we want you guys to all get jobs somewheres in your decided fields, right?
Thank you. Those all seem like really great paths that you guys took, so thank you for sharing. The third question we have is, how competitive are positions in the field of accounting and finance? So we will start with you, Mary Kate.
Sure. So as for positions in my field, which is actuarial, there's not a huge number of actuaries in the city, so if you're looking to stay in Halifax, you're going to find that there's just not a lot of job advertisements. And one thing I didn't mention in my last answer to the previous question was that there was no job advertisement to the job I eventually got. It was a cold call. I just sent them my resume and said, I'm good at math, do you guys want to hire me? And they said, sure, because that's sort of how it works. There's not a lot of job advertisements. If you went to a bigger city, if you're looking at Toronto or somewhere like that, I think the way it works in the actuarial field is if you're willing to start down that path, generally you're going to be able to find a job. It's a sort of a self-weeding profession. Most people start, they write an exam, they realize, oh, that was really hard and I still didn't pass it. So maybe this isn't for me. And then if you do write an exam and you do pass it, you get a big raise and your employer congratulates you and you move up the ranks, and that's sort of how it works. So if you're good self-study, usually the job will kind of work out for you, and that's what I've seen. There's not very many people who start and pass exams and who end up not being able to move up in their jobs, get further career development. And as for introductory positions, typically you need to have an exam or 2 exams in the actuarial program, so that's under the Society of Actuaries. They administer the exams through the state. So if you have an exam or 2, generally someone will hire you. That's what I've seen.
Thank you. Andre?
Well, as you might have ascertained in my introductory comments, I've never applied for an accounting job, but I can share with you some insider knowledge from the point of view of the CPA school for the region, because we quite literally see everybody who comes in, at least to the CPA path as it's called now, and where they're likely to go off to. I think it's interesting to note that however competitive it may or may not be right now, and I have no evidence to say that we have too many accountants or too few accountants in Atlantic Canada. My colleagues will weigh in on that. I'm just going by what salary is in the trend, whether it's going up or not. But whether it's good or not this very moment is immaterial compared to my next point, which is in a few years, it's about to be terrible for employers, which means it's going to be great for anybody who's sitting in this room. And here's my argument, and it's a numerically based one. If you look at the legacy designations, that's sort of our own word for people who went through CA, CGA, and CMA, which were the call letters up until roughly this year. We would graduate between 400 and by next fall, it would be about 500 new CPAs or CPA equivalents in the region, 4 Atlantic provinces plus Bermuda. So keep that number in mind, and you have to assume that must be what the market can more or less take in, notwithstanding, if there were too many, salaries would go down. There's no evidence of that right now. But 2 things are radically changing that will be good for you. One is that the program, and I'll say it off the record, even though I think theoretically here we're completely on the record, the program has gotten to be more thorough under the new CPA regime. And currently, it's appealing to a narrower group of people than the other designations did in the past. That's a much bigger conversation, but suffice it to say, I predict, and I'm in charge of predicting for our organization, I predict we will have 350 graduates for the first few outputs, which is, do the math, what is that, 70% of what we have right now, which has got to work in your favor. And that's not even the most significant thing, is I'm sure you're all aware of the demographic blip that's going to cause a whole bunch of well-off accountants, and they are all well-off accountants, to be able to retire at the age of, well, I think your average baby boomer right now is about 61, 59, 61, something like that. They're all in a position where they could retire tomorrow if they wanted to. I assume most of them will retire over the next 3 or 4 years, which has got to be, gold-lined news for everyone in this room, that those 2 factors should happen to come to play just as you're deciding whether it's worth getting your CPA. So I think that's more important to know than how competitive it is right now. That's how competitive it will be in about 2 or 3 years, which happens to be the length of time it takes to become a CPA. The other thing that if you will, the marketplace doesn't seem to realize is the broad appeal of the CPA designation. I mean, I have people who work for me and they go and give information sessions, maybe you've seen them, about becoming a CPA, an accountant, right? And 9 times out of 10, you have somebody come up and they did not realize, quote unquote, that you could graduate from Mount St. Vincent, not necessarily have to go work in an accounting firm. I hope you all know this better than the average person does. A lot of people seem to assume that you have to work for a firm. In fact, only about 40 to 45% of the people in our school work at accounting firms. Keep in mind, this is an accounting designation. Only 40 to 45% of them work in accounting firms. Ergo, the majority of them actually do not. Never mind that it's a choice. It's the majority. Within that 55%, if you will, and I'll limit my comments to this next one, you'd be astounded to see the variety of roles that people with CAs, CGAs, CMAs, and now we're calling them CPAs have. I mean, survey of 5 up here, and I'm not sure how many of my colleagues here wake up, look at themselves in the mirror every morning and say, I'm waking up and going to my accounting job. I did not actually hear that from at least 4 people on this panel, and yet none of you could have your jobs equivalent for actuaries without the professional standing that you need to be able to do it.
That's very great insight. Joelle?
I can't really add any more to what he said. I mean, I can just speak of the past. I mean, I do know that in the past, if you wanted to get your CA designation, you had to work at a public accounting firm, and that now with the CPA designation, that's opened up a lot more doors and a lot more opportunities. So I really have nothing else that would add any value.
Thank you. Rhonda?
Maybe just a couple other comments. So, certainly attaining your CPA is a path, but within our company, which is a publicly traded Canadian company, we have about 1,500 employees, and I'd say we have about 100 finance/accounting type jobs. And those can range in lots of areas, from taxation to, supporting a business unit, preparing their financial information, accounts payable, accounts receivable, monitoring inventory, doing analytical work, working in corporate development where I am, doing analysis on acquisitions. So there is a very broad range of jobs within industry to support, what some of my colleagues here are saying. And so just to try to open your mind to some of the other avenues that you might be able to pursue, certainly with your accounting or finance major here within your degree.
Thank you. And finally, Nathan.
So from a competitive perspective, I'll use an example to sort of highlight this. We recently posted a commercial banking analyst role here for Halifax. This is basically, it's a role that would directly align to a finance undergrad or master's student. Our competition was in market for about 2 weeks, and we had 250 odd applications for that role. There's one position, there's 250, and I would say significantly qualified individuals applying for that position. So that's an example from the Halifax market. I'm from the East Coast. I like to support the East Coast as much as I can. So I'm going to use that as an example. If you were to be applying to a role with us in Toronto, it's a different story. It might be one role to 3,000 applicants. The competitive level is still there, and I would suggest that, competition, to piggyback on Andre's comments here for a moment, competition is all relative. You guys are actually coming into a marketplace where it is highly competitive, but there are going to be significant opportunities for you as well. You've timed it well. Whether you did that on purpose or not, you've timed it well. Taking the right steps now over the next couple of years are really going to pay off. When I look at our workforce, we have a significant number of individuals that are, again, to that same point, fit into that baby boom demographic. And those are all individuals who, again, have had great career paths within the bank, and they're all ready to retire in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I would suggest that competitive, yes, but I'd also ask you to keep in mind that where you start within an organization currently, specifically an organization like TD, where you start within an organization is not where you likely will be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your career path. You should expect to see significant movement very, very quickly, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of that demographic shift. So competitive, yes, but if you open the doors beyond a particular role to enter into the organization, there will be a lot of opportunity for you to move that career path internally afterwards.
Thank you. So our fourth question is, what kinds of opportunities for advancement are there in your companies you work for or in the industry you work in? So we'll start with you, Nathan.
Great. So I guess I just touched on that a little bit. As far as opportunities for advancement, inside of TD as an organization, we have many different training programs. We actually have intake programs as well. So again, I'll go back to our commercial banking unit. We have an associate program through commercial banking that actually allows us to bring you in and get you experience across a number of different areas of commercial banking, whether it's agriculture or it's a pure finance pure finance type of a role, an analytics-driven type position, whether it's industry specific or into real estate, our real estate division. Our associate program will bring you in and sort of roll you through about 6 months of experience in each one of those areas. At the end of that 2-year time period, so we go through about 4 phases in that. At the end of that 2-year time period, then you'll usually roll back out into one of those 4 areas that you had gained exposure within. That's one example of a sort of a structured training mentorship type program that we have. Those are across anywhere within the bank, whether it's the retail division or commercial banking, small business, wherever it might be, you'll find those structured training programs for our intakes. As far as career pathing and opportunities, internal to the organization, we have mentorship programs. We have an innumerable number of internal. We actually have our own internal university where basically you can go and do your own certifications. It's all TD facilitated, but they're actually industry standard for certifications as well. So, you know, whether it's going back to school and having us fund further education, it's probably the last thing on your minds right now. But FYI, it's coming. You know, but we pay for people to go back to school and do other educational endeavors. We basically have you and your career path lined out for about a 1 to 5 year time period. So every single TD employee has their individual personal development plan that they work on with their current manager, and it's basically it's a roadmap for you for the next 5 years, and it includes whether it is going back to school or certifications or whatever experiences or exposures you need. It maps that all out, and on a semi-annual basis, you go back over that to make sure you're making progress and taking steps towards achieving all those pieces that will get you to your career goals.
Thank you. Rhonda?
So at the company where I am, Parkland Fuel Corporation, we do hire primarily from within our organization for promotions, or try to as best we can. So those 100 positions that I mentioned earlier, a number of those are entry-level positions that you could start straight out of university. Here in Halifax, we have a team of about 20 of those folks. Other positions in Central Canada and Western Canada. Similar to what Nathan had mentioned, we have internal training programs. We'll support you with external other training programs, support you through your accounting designation if you chose that path down the road. And you know, there is you know, once you kind of have that, you know, starting role, I think a lot of it is developing your network within that particular company and externally to move your career and understand what those other opportunities may be. As I mentioned, you know, my first role was an inventory analyst at Coca-Cola, and you know, I've probably had at least, you know, 10 jobs since then in the past you know, several years. So things constantly change, especially within a business environment, and so, you know, just being in touch with your network and what's happening and learning about other aspects of, you know, if it's a company that you're working for, you know, whether it's TD, Parkland, other companies, just what's happening within the various departments, because often many of those departments will have finance and accounting type positions where you can apply your skills. So just a little word of advice on that aspect. So thank you.
Thank you. Joelle?
So WBLI is a training office. In the past, we've hired CA students. Now we'll be hiring CPA students. And we would support you through your studies. We have a lot of internal, we have mentors, and we have a lot of internal extra study time that we help you, and you write practice exams and all that kind of stuff to prepare for when you write the final exam. And after you get your designation, you probably stay in the assurance side where you're doing corporate tax and financial statements and helping out clients for a couple years to get some experience. But then there's also opportunities to specialize, become a business evaluator, become a tax specialist, go into our insolvency side. So WBLI is a full service firm, so there's lots of opportunities for growth and promotion there.
Thank you. Andre?
Well, our school is pretty small. There won't be a job for many people there. We're only 14 people big, plus a bunch of contractors and members. But I can say when I look at the roster of students, you know, and every time we have an intake, we look to see where they're working. I could probably do this off the top of my head here. Roughly 40 to 50% of any usually young person coming into their CPA program will be working at a company just like a WLBI. WBLI, thank you. That's why I looked at you. I knew I had it wrong. Or some of the larger firms that you're more used to hearing about, whether it's PwC, EY, Deloitte, KPMG, Grant Thornton, etc. The traditional accounting place. As I mentioned, that's only about 40%. And a number of people work at your Sobeys, your Amera, Alliant, maybe that one less so moving forward. But counterintuitively, there's a whole group of employers out there that I think are off of most people's radars because you don't see their logos anywhere. An example, in fact, the single biggest employer of our students right now is none of the companies I just mentioned. It's Citco. I don't know how many of you know Citco. I know on this board all of you do. But they're a company that deals with, and to be honest, I don't exactly know. I imagine it's reinsurance, hedge funds, more of the international financial instruments that really have absolutely nothing to do with Halifax per se, other than their so-called back offices are here. There are other examples of those companies. Mitsubishi is one, formerly called Butterfield Fulcrum, if I'm not mistaken. I want to say Admiral is another one. I mean, who would know what Admiral was? But these are all the companies that have great first job in accounting opportunities. And to the best of my knowledge, they will all pay for your designation if that's where you're bound. So it's that third category I wanted to highlight for you.
Thank you. And finally, Mary Kate.
So I'm going to answer the question in the context of a consulting firm. So actuaries typically work in either pension consulting or life insurance or other forms of insurance. So I'm going to answer the question from the consulting firm perspective, and it'll be pretty similar to the accounting firm answer in that the career path is fairly straightforward. If you follow the sort of typical path, you'll be hired as someone fresh out of school with maybe an exam under your belt. The firm will support you and pay for your exams, give you paid study time off, and as and when you pass your exams, those become your promotions. So I work for an organization that considers itself flat, so I didn't actually get a promotion until I was awarded a principalship this year. So that was my first promotion in 13 years. But if you worked for one of our competitors, you probably would have gone through about 6 different title changes during that time. So you start as an analyst or as an actuarial student, then you become an analyst and an associate and a junior consultant and a senior consultant and so on until you become a part owner of the firm if you get to that point in your career. But basically it's whatever you want to make it in consulting. If you do well with it, if you first of all pass your exams, that'll get you through your first 5 to 10 years. And then thereafter it's, how much client work can you take on? How good are you at managing projects and business relationships? And that's where the opportunities are. So it follows a fairly predictable kind of track. And if you're not happy in your firm, by the time you get a designation, you'll have recruiters calling you every couple months. So if you want to kind of take a side step or an upward step by switching firms, that's often an opportunity as well.
Thank you. That's all really great information. So our next question is, what is it about your job that you enjoy the most? So we'll start with you, Joelle.
What I love the most is the fact that I go to work every day and there's something new every day. I deal with a lot of different clients in a lot of different types of industries, big clients, small clients, medium-sized clients. So the variety is what I really like. Usually I go to work in the morning thinking I'm going to do something and I don't get to it. And dealing with people and training CPA students that come in through the door and watching them grow and pass their exams and things like that, it's very rewarding. So that's what I like.
Thank you. Andre?
I think it's probably a similar answer. Since we're here in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada for that matter, I think a theme that we all struggle with in terms of our work is the preference to be a big fish in a small pond or a little fish in a big pond. And I've had what I think is good fortune to work at small companies. Maybe I'm just rationalizing because that's all I've done. But it turns out that I much prefer to have a variety of things in my job than it is to be just handling a little tiny part of the machine doing the same thing every day. So consciously or unconsciously, I've chosen the path of smaller enterprises, and I actually moved here from Toronto. That wasn't for economic reasons, that was for getting married reasons, but I'm quite happy to be in Halifax and have frankly, way more opportunities here than you would in Toronto. As Nathan was saying, it's a heck of a lot less people, even if it's 250 to 1 versus 3,000 to 1. So it's incredible how fast you can go up the ranks. It's probably the same in your enterprise as well, isn't it? Yeah. And I can hazard to guess that Mary Kate could be working anywhere in the world that she wanted. So I've really enjoyed that part, and I'll tie it back to the designation once again. To be able to be a big fish, or relatively big fish, in a very small pond, inevitably you have to rise to the rank of manager to do that, or you need to be a specialist. I'm not a specialist at anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I have varied taste. There's a whole bunch of things I'm a little bit good at, and no one particular thing, say like being an actuary, that I'm supremely good at. So the bane of my existence will be trying to be successful in a management position. Harkening back to an earlier point, as somebody who came in through the door of communications into management, and keep in mind, there's only so many ways of getting into management. Either you came through as the finance guru, you came through HR, you came through IT, you came through marketing. You know, it's basically like a listing of MBA courses. I came in through the communications and marketing tentacle, if you will. Ultimately, if you want to be the trusted advisor or the person who is the principal, CE, CEO, whatever, the leader of the organization, all those trusted advisors to company presidents, 9 times out of 10, they're the CFO. Not because of their charismatic personality, but because they're able to do the quantitative analysis that helps you to guide risks and decisions. And when things get hot and heavy, inevitably you turn to the CFO. So guess how many CEOs out there are actually accountants in disguise? The answer is a hell of a lot of them. A ton of the companies here in Halifax are, if you will, secretly run by accountants because they were the CFOs, they were the trusted advisors, and they get those doors opened. What I'm saying is, however it is that you rise to the rank of management, you're going to need something that allows you to speak the language of business, a lot of which is accounting and risk management, and is often answered by MBAs. In my particular case, it was a CMA. I think it could have been partly answered by an MBA as well. It's just I really wanted to have the quantitative modeling. And even for somebody who's in marketing, it's amazing to be able to wake up, as I had to do today, go in for my marketing job, where a lot of it, frankly, is trying to be charismatic and persuasive, and be able to throw out quantitative numbers in the face of our accountant and say, and that's why it's going up 17% next year. And he wishes dimes to donuts that I didn't have a CMA background, because otherwise his job would be easy to say, I disagree with you. I love being able to go to my job every day and be able to make persuasive management recommendations based both on qualitative and quantitative sides of the house.
Thank you. Mary Kate?
I think my answer is going to be very similar to Joelle's, probably because we both work in a similar kind of environment, but it's a little bit of the small office, big fish, small pond kind of thing. I really love the fact that in consulting I get to work on different projects, and again, like Joelle said, you know, I walk in planning to do one thing and then my day gets completely turned upside down, but it's not all bad. There's a lot of putting out fires, but it's exciting stuff. We're dealing with, you know, multi-billion-dollar pension funds. We're doing sort of stochastic risk management analysis and modeling. You know, I'm right in there building stuff. I'm using Excel. Like, it's a very hands-on, even at a fairly senior level, you get to do a lot of sort of hands-on fun stuff, and then you get to present it to the client as well. So it's really satisfying in that way, and also it allows, in my particular role, it allows for a ton of creativity. So, you know, if I have a unique and, you know, custom tailored solution for one of our clients, and you bring that to one of my colleagues, they're like, yeah, go for it, see if it works. And you can kind of, you know, there's sort of a lot of freedom in my job to kind of come up with solutions for our clients that are going to work for them. So that's also a function of kind of working for a more boutique sized firm in the industry and having that kind of freedom to do that. So that's probably what I like most about my job right now.
Thank you. Nathan?
So from my world, one of the things that I enjoy the most actually is hiring people like you guys. and there's a pretty good reason for that. It leads to probably my second favorite component, which is rehiring people like you guys, but after your first role in the organization. So a secondary component of what I do within TD is hiring all of our internal individuals. So when we're moving people from one role to another. So one of the things I like the most about my role is seeing that career progression, and actually to the point that we've heard a couple of times here around sort of that consultancy model. I'm a big fan of consulting organizations. I've actually worked in the consultant world myself, and my role is technically a consultative role within my own organization. One of the things I like about a company my size, though, if we want to go to the big pond for a minute, we have 85,000 employees. That's a pretty big pond all in one organization. If you work yourself under a consultant type model and you look at it as I'm building and growing and developing my own career path, we do everything. Point blank, the organization does everything. So if there's a niche role that you're looking to get into, you don't need to leave TD to go and find that position. We do it somewheres. So if you sort of run yourself as almost as your own small business, you may take a role that has a small scope of position to start, but that's great. You'll have 10 other roles over the next 10 years that will also scope you out into all of those other different areas. And that leads me right back to sort of why I enjoy what I do every day. It's because I get to come in and see people take on those 10 roles over 10 years and watch them take those next steps in their career path, and it's very exciting.
Thank you. And finally, Rhonda.
Sure. I love my job. I get to shop every day in acquisitions. I'm shopping for businesses all the time. On a more serious note, it's certainly a very challenging job. Our acquisitions range anywhere from $5 million to $500 million. So we're dealing with very large amounts of our shareholders' capital. So we take that very seriously in what we do. And the process to acquire a business, starts off very small but becomes very large very quickly, involving a lot of different stakeholders. So I love working with lots of different people, leveraging their expertise, working with accounting firms, helping us with due diligence, working with tax and legal advisors, helping us with that process in the transaction. So get to work with a lot of people within our organization as well as external advisors, and the trick is kind of bringing all those folks together to achieve a common goal and making sure that we're adding shareholder value through the process. So I love my job every day, and it's lots of fun.
Thank you. So as students who are in their final months before graduation or in their first, second, or third year, we're wondering if the organization you work for offers new grad, summer, part-time, or co-op positions, and if so, could you provide a little insight into these positions, such as when you look to hire, the application process, or any information you think may be useful to the students in this room? And we will start with Mary Kate.
Sorry, I'm not going to have the best answer to this. Our office in Halifax is only 18 people, so we don't typically hire short-term hires, but our Toronto office, which is 200-odd staff, they do hire summer co-op students. I'm just not particularly familiar with the process, but if anyone has questions, I can certainly point you in the right direction.
Thank you. And we will go with Andre next.
Yes, mine would be disappointing as well. We don't hire directly, but I think I've given you good examples of companies here that do.
Thank you. Joelle?
We traditionally, like most public accounting firms, hire co-op students normally during this time of year, tax time. I know a lot of the firms will come out through your co-op office and post. I have been hiring the co-op students over the last 10 years, and I traditionally come to events like this, meet people like you, and those of you who follow up with me, you're the first person I will call and get your resume in, and you'll come in for an interview. So I don't really post at co-op, but I will come and talk to people like you. So traditionally we do hire mostly in the tax season, January through April. Sometimes we do hire in the summer, but it's very rare. But
Thank you. Rhonda?
Similar, we do have a national summer student program as well. We do hire nationally in a few co-op positions as well. As I mentioned, we do a finance department here in Halifax where we do tend to hire 1 or 2 students for a summer program, and those roles are usually sort of analytical or clerical roles, starting in our accounting department, working with some of our assistant controllers, supporting our finance function, helping either with accounts payable, accounts receivable, and just learning some of the general business processes that might help you just sort of translate your education into sort of more reality based.
Thank you.
Could I add one more thing?
Yeah.
for us in hiring co-op students, we see it as an investment. A lot of our co-op students come back and do their designation with us, so it's a great opportunity to get your foot in the door. And most firms do hire during tax season, and if you're not a co-op student, say you're going to be graduating, or you just graduated, you can go out and sell yourself as a co-op student, but actually better because you've got your full degree. So I just wanted to point that out. Traditionally, we've hired co-op students. They come, we train them for 4 months. If the relationship works, then they'll come back and do their designation with us. So it works out well.
That's great, thanks. And finally, Nathan.
We have nationalized co-op and internship programs at TD, which means that you need to become familiar with our website, our corporate website, and our careers page in order to apply to those. So no need to run around town trying to find someone to give a resume to. It's all online. Think of those programs, again, they're very structured programs. They run throughout the year. If you're going to apply to something, if you have a co-op term coming up for a summer, let's say a summer time period, you need to be applying 1 quarter ahead of time, okay? So a lot of people come up a month ahead of time and say, hey, I'd like to apply to something, and I've got nothing for you. So think 1 quarter ahead of time for any co-op term that you're looking to get involved with the bank with. Also, from a geographic mobility perspective, if there's one thing, and again, I stress this, I'm from Halifax, I love Halifax, and never want to leave Halifax, and thus far have not had to do so. Geographic mobility coming out of school is a fantastic thing for you to be able to have. Specifically, if you're looking at co-op and internship programs, most of them for us are housed in Toronto, and it comes down to, again, a size issue where we just don't have all of the components here to get you exposure to. We want you, if we're bringing you into those programs, to actually get everything you can out of those programs. So sometimes for those structured programs, it means moving to Toronto to take that on for a particular amount of time. It doesn't mean that you can't transition back to the East Coast if you'd like to afterwards. That's usually something that's quite readily available for you to do. On a side note, looking at part-time employment, one of the things that if I could go back and do university again, I worked awfully hard while I was going to school. If I could have, and really should have, I should have looked at getting a part-time role in a bank. If you've ever thought about, or if you're thinking about taking your career path in the finance or accounting area into one of the big banks, one of the best things that you can get exposure for yourself to is the retail side of the bank. For us, the retail side of our organization generates about 70% of our revenue, okay? It's the biggest, chunkiest component of the bank. If you want to work anywheres within the bank, one of the best places for you to have exposure and understanding to really know how that business functions is the retail arm of the bank. So a part-time role as a customer service representative in a branch, 15 hours a week, great, we'll pay you decently. It won't be a co-op term, it'll be something we would hire you as a part-time employee on an ongoing basis, but helps you guys pay the bills you have here and gets you experience that's worth its weight in gold.
That's all really great advice, thank you. And our final question for today's panel is, do you have any advice or suggestions for students pursuing a career in accounting and finance? And let's start with Nathan for this one.
That's a tough one. I go back to my earlier comment around 85,000 employees in our organization. If you're looking for a career path and not just 5 years somewhere and who knows what after that, joining a big bank, specifically a big, powerful, strong, growing bank like TD, the doors really are open once you're inside our organization for a long-term career path. And I would say what that means for you guys as students coming out is picking those first couple of stops along your career path. It's very important. It really sets you up. It's the foundation pieces for the remainder of that career path, and coming to an organization where you can have a 20, 30, 40-year career path if you'd like in many, many different roles in many, many different areas. That's a really great thing to be able to offer you guys as prospective employees. So I would say take a look at TD as a place to start and hopefully finish a career path.
Thank you. Rhonda?
Sure. Maybe just touch on a couple of comments I mentioned earlier, certainly from my perspective and experience. That networking aspect of things, so reaching out as you're nearing the graduation time frame, just understanding, through friends, parents, friends, what businesses they're involved in, learning about those businesses, doing research. The internet is great for learning about companies and there are vast volumes of information that companies now post, on their websites for the public to access to learn. So just that networking aspect, as well as to touch on what Nathan is saying, you may not know the third or fourth step that's coming next. Just sort of make that first step, and the other steps will fall into place. I certainly wouldn't have predicted sort of where my career has taken me over the last 14 years. So try not to, it can be a little overwhelming and just not very tangible at this stage. Just try to make that first step, and the others will fall into place. So good luck.
Thank you. And Joelle?
I think taking advantage and coming to events like this and coming and meeting us and following up with us is a great opportunity. It helps put a face to a name, and you send your resume. That's where I do all my hiring for co-ops who potentially come on and do their designation with us. So be thankful that the school does put this on for you and provides an opportunity to be talking to people like us. So any chance you have to network and meet people, and not only meet them, follow up with them and talk to them. I'm always very open with all the students, because I was a co-op student as well. Anybody comes in, I'll meet with them in my office, I'll take them to lunch, we'll talk about their options. I mean, I've been there, I try to help as much as I can, so take advantage of that.
Thank you. Andre?
Maybe briefly, 3 things come to mind, and I think everyone said it already. While you have the chance, expose yourself to lots of things. I was going to say, travel, if you haven't already, but it's just a euphemism for expose yourself to different stuff. If you have an interest in math, as came up, put yourself in the line of fire for things that have to do with math. If you're interested in financial institutions, do something. It doesn't really matter exactly what. Your career path will not be a straight one if my experience is anything to go by, but always be kind of walking in the right direction. If you line up enough things in your resume and your experience bank and expose yourself to things, inevitably you will be in the sector or a field where your interests are aligned. I mean, it's just a truism. Whenever I talk to people who are at the cusp of starting their careers, they are worried and anxious about knowing the precise answer. My advice is to ignore that completely. The precise answer hasn't come to me at the age of 44. I just know I continue to walk sort of where roughly my interests are, collect sort of skills and experience that have to do with roughly that, and I will inevitably be somewhere where those things are. It's the best I can offer.
Thank you. And finally, Mary Kate.
So I'm sure lots of you, it's possible, have not even heard much about what an actuary does. So the first thing I would recommend is there's a website called beanactuary.org, and it has some great information if you're kind of curious about whether or not this might be something that would suit you. So, do a little homework, and if it seems like it's something that might appeal, if you're interested in kind of this area but not necessarily going the accounting route, I think my biggest tip would be to try to pass an exam, to have one exam under your belt before you start applying for jobs, because most employers will expect to see that. A lot of students do an actuarial science degree, which wasn't offered at Acadia for me. I did math. I probably wouldn't have taken it even if it was, because I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of students will come out of schools in Ontario with an actuarial science degree and a couple exams under their belt. So to be competitive, you have to have probably an exam or two. So I would say research the career. If it seems like it's something you're interested in, take a try at one of the exams. If you pass, that's a great start. And then the other thing I would recommend too is with regard to your resumes. I know that when I was hired, comments were made sort of after the fact that one of the big things that appealed to my employer was that I had a well-rounded resume. So I had a lot of other things on my resume besides math nerdy stuff. I had a lot of activities and interests and jobs that were, I was a bank teller, so I did the CSR thing, but I also had other jobs that were completely unrelated and just showed sort of well-rounded, aspect to my personality. And so I think that appeals if you're looking to get into consulting. You need to be able to talk to people of all walks of life. So
that's all really great advice, so thank you for sharing that. So we're going to open it up to our audience now. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists or a panelist? Particular, raise your hand. Don't all jump at once. All right, Julie.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Mm-hmm. My name is Julie White, and my question is similar to the last one. But since a couple of you mentioned that you were adult learners, do you have any advice for mature students on how to use their work and life experience, basically to help find a job upon graduation?
It's a really great question. You guys, whoever wants to answer it first can go ahead.
I don't know if it directly answers your question, but since you used adult learner, and I certainly did use that phrase, for a few minutes in time, clearly I thought I was going to do what my degree allowed me to do. And I think I've said this in many information sessions, which I'd be remiss not to mention. If you want to learn more about becoming a CPA, for goodness sakes, you have no excuse. They're offered every 2 or 3 weeks, like within a couple of miles of here. Just go to our website. I assumed I would go into journalism, as I was saying, but in the end, I just sort of ended up in that general field. Very quickly, I realized I was going to spend the rest of my life studying, which is something that would have made me vomit at the age of 20-something. But now I'm not so concerned about it. I mean, my initial degree, what it did is it allowed me to get my first job. It got me facing a particular direction on the career compass. Luckily, it was sort of toward the field of communication, which I didn't realize also kind of led to marketing. Fine, it led to business in my case. And there's probably only so many directions. It led me in that one. But having gotten on that path, I had the wherewithal to know that my journey was going to be very short unless I continued to expose myself to stuff. Can you say that? That sounds awkward as it came out, but you know what I mean. And continue to learn. So if I wanted, as I realized management was important, I flirted with an MBA course. I took, there's a university you may have heard of, Heriot-Watt. It's an example of one of these online universities. You can just sort of take an MBA course and experiment with it. I actually took accounting. Funny enough, I had taken accounting in grade 13 in Ontario, which also dates me. And I love the course. Technically, I'm still enrolled in an MBA, and you know what? Every couple of years, I will pick off a course. One of them will surprise me, and maybe it will be a new tenet to what management means to me. But yeah, when I was in my late 30s, I did, the thing is, see, once you have a degree and once you have sectorial experience, there are a lot of opportunities that open up. In my case, for a few years, CMA had an executive program, and I evidently was borderline material for such a program, and I took advantage of it for the few years that was available, and I came into it. I could just as easily have done an executive MBA, say, at the St. Mary's, for example. I've had employers that would have paid for parts of that. And I'm sure as I turn 50 and 60, there'll be other things I do. I will be learning forever, and I guess I've just gotten accustomed to that. But the first job, to answer your question, the first degree, rather, got me my first job. That was the first thing.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
I think the only thing that I would add is that whether it's adult learning or it's, you went from high school directly into your undergrad, for all intents and purposes, you're fighting the same battle as far as that, getting my first job. So I really wouldn't give too much additional advice under that circumstance versus the other. There's just not a whole lot of differentiation between the two of them. The one caveat I'd throw around that is that you actually likely have more experiences that you've been through to be able to provide to an employer. So going back to that well-rounded, if you think about a lot of the answers you've heard to some of these questions, I don't think there's been one person here who hasn't talked about sort of being able to sell yourself either within an organization or to an employer or to a client, right? Everything you're doing in your day-to-day lives, whether it's in school, it's in business, wherever it might be, you're learning and developing the ability to sort of consult to a client, to work with people, to communicate with people appropriately in a business format. Those are all the kinds of things that are sort of intangible skills that go along with your education, your degree, and the functionalities you build within that. Most organizations, because again, you guys look around, there's an awful lot of you that are graduating from the same program, right? So what's the differentiator that makes me bring you into my organization versus the person you're sitting right next to, right? It's probably, can I sit you down in front of a client somewheres and can you win me business, right? it doesn't matter what degree or functionality you're working within, that's a large portion of what you need to bring to the table. So for someone, to answer your question directly, for someone who is maybe going through education at a later stage in life, the one thing that you do maybe bring to the table is some of those other experiences within life that you can then leverage into those business environments, right? So find a way to show us that, whether it's in an interview or on a resume or whatever it might be, and that certainly will work well for you.
Thank you. Does any other student have a question?
Jason Corrali, I'm a third-year business student, and I'm an older student as well. I got a question for Andre. Is the CPA designation good all across Canada? So if I move to British Columbia or Alberta, would I have to write an equivalency test, or is it good all across? That's my first question.
Okay, well, since I have a short memory, let's start with that. Well, you're lucky to be growing up in the age that you are. I mean, thanks to recent federal and now provincial legislation, it's frankly anti-constitutional not to allow professional designations to move from provinces to province. So that's the easy part of the question. Whether you're a teacher these days, a counselor, I imagine an actuary, a lawyer or a doctor, or a CPA, by virtue of our charter, yes, you can move from province to province. In fact, it's literally an email to an office, and 5 minutes later, I think they transfer your file. It's that easy. Didn't used to be. But to expand on your question, even more valuable is that internationally, most of these credentials, Canada happens to be in a global leadership position. So take the CPA designation or any of the accounting designations. It is one of maybe 8 that I can think of in the Western English-speaking world, and to be honest, I threw Australia in there. So it is a well-recognized designation, even though ours is only sort of 10 minutes old as an acronym. And the nature of global trade is such that all these professional associations have MRAs, like, good Lord help me here, reciprocity agreements, I don't know, a memorandum reciprocity agreements, that allow you to go to, for example, in our case, if you went to the United States, it's not so much that you trade in one for the other, but the standards are often globally set, and even the Canadian accounting ones meet a global standard, such that you can join the American CPA, bit of an idiosyncrasy there in that they're state-run, not nationally run, or go to Great Britain and become the equivalent there, or Australia, as I mentioned. So my examples are accounting ones, but they're true for just about any profession that I can think of. And now I'm curious to know, is it true for actuaries?
Yeah, I can weigh in on if anyone's curious about how it works for actuaries. The exams are administered through the Society of Actuaries, which is out of the United States. And when you complete all of your exams, you become an FSA, which is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. That's the American designation. And then you have to write a conversion exam, which basically takes all the sort of, the underlying math is the same no matter what country you're in, but there's a few regulatory specifics that are Canadian specific. So you write a further small exam, which kind of converts your fellowship in the Society of Actuaries to a fellowship in the Canadian Institute of Actuaries. And so right now I have, an FSA and an FCIA, but it was sort of, so it looks like I have 2 designations, but really it was through one set of exams and then one little conversion exam. And the Society of Actuaries in the United States, the designation there is fairly transferable. I'm sure it would be recognized internationally if you were applying for a job in other countries, the UK or Australia. The only distinction is in Canada, you can't sign off on an actuarial valuation report if you're not an FCIA, so you do need to have that additional conversion designation just to be able to practice in that way in Canada. So they may have similar rules in other countries, but starting with the Society of Actuaries track is sort of going to get you what you need for most countries, I would think.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
I did. This question is for Joelle. In your specific firm, if we wanted to specialize in audit and insurance, or just specialize in taxation or financial accounting, do we have that option, or do we have to learn little bits of everything while we're either employed or co-opted with your firm?
Well, traditionally, we've hired CA, now CPA students. So you do come in and you do go under the assurance side where you're learning auditing. And that's, with accounting firms, that's what you're going to be focused on, is auditing on that side of the CPA exam and stuff like that. And then after that, you can't, I mean, we do auditing, but we also do some corporate tax and personal tax, so you get a little bit of exposure there as well. And then after you get your designation, if you want to further specialize and become a tax specialist or become a business evaluator, then there's opportunities there to further your education, so.
Thank you. Does anyone have another question? We have time for one more. No? Okay. Well, if everyone could give a round of applause for our panelists. And if you could please remain seated with your Learning Passport booklet page filled out, Ariel will come over to you and stamp it. You have to stay seated, though, in order to get your stamp, okay? Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks.